The Maya also had that 260-day calendar that we see on the Aztec calendar Oreo.
Scientists have just unlocked the genetic secrets of one of the world's most powerful ancient empires, and what they uncovered has shaken history itself. Hidden within centuries-old bones lies DNA evidence so astonishing, it's rewriting everything we thought we knew about the Aztecs, from lost cities to vanished bloodlines buried beneath the heart of Mexico. Join us as we uncover this new discovery and why it matters to the world. The DNA discovery that shook Mexico. They looked so strange and pale that many people thought they were heavenly messengers. No one expected that their arrival would change everything the Aztecs once believed. It was a world of gods, warriors, and power. But what if the story of the great Aztec Empire that everyone grew up hearing was not the real one at all? For years, experts believed they knew how the Aztecs began. They thought the Mexica, a wandering tribe, came from a mysterious northern homeland called Aztlan. After a long journey, they settled in the Valley of Mexico around the year 1300 and built their dazzling island capital, Tenochtitlan, in the middle of Lake Texcoco. From there, their empire grew so vast and powerful that it dominated nearly all of Central America. It was a story of bravery, belief, and strength, or so it seemed. When modern scientists finally examined the DNA left behind in ancient Aztec bones, they uncovered a puzzle that didn't fit the old story. The biggest surprise came when researchers extracted something special from bones found in the twin city of Tenochtitlan called Tlatelolco. It was mitochondrial DNA, a tiny strand passed down from mothers to their children. This delicate thread of genetic memory carried the echoes of countless generations. As scientists studied it, they began to see patterns that shattered everything once believed about the Aztecs' beginnings. The DNA didn't match the simple version written in textbooks. Instead, it revealed a maze of mixed populations, invasions, and even large-scale replacement of entire groups of people. It painted a picture of a civilization shaped not only by warriors and temples, but by waves of change, movement, and survival. And that was only the start. As more bones were tested from cities across central Mexico, the findings grew even more astonishing. A pattern appeared, a hidden history of shifting bloodlines and cultural blending that completely challenged the old tale of who the Aztecs really were. The past was no longer a single story carved in stone. It was a living mosaic of people, each carrying a piece of truth in their very bones. Mysterious disappearance of the Otomi race. This was the moment when the story took a dark, haunting twist. That shimmering lake city once called Xaltecan, so calm and beautiful, was not just a jewel of the ancient world. It was the keeper of one of Mesoamerica's eeriest secrets. Long before the Aztecs ruled with pride and power, Xaltecan was the beating heart of the Otomi people's empire. They were no ordinary villagers living quietly by the water. They had their own graceful language, their own leaders, their own art, and a way of life that had flourished in the Valley of Mexico for centuries. Everything about them spoke of order, skill, and peace. But then came the Aztecs, ambitious, bold, and hungry for land. Their rise was unstoppable, and when they cast their eyes on Xaltecan, everything began to change. One day, the Otomi were there, trading, building temples, raising families, crafting beauty with their hands. And then, as if the earth swallowed them whole, they vanished, not a trace left behind, but silent ruins and empty homes. For generations, historians tried to make sense of it. How could an entire city, a whole people, disappear so completely? Two ideas dominated the search for answers. Some believed the Otomi had peacefully joined the Aztec world, marrying into their society and blending their lives with the empire's growing power. Others thought they had fled before conflict could strike, leaving their beloved valley behind to start anew somewhere far away. Both explanations felt possible, gentle, even hopeful. But what the scientists later discovered would tear those comforting theories apart. When geneticists began testing DNA found in Xaltecan's ancient graves, the results were nothing short of chilling. The bones from before the Aztec conquest carried the unmistakable genetic imprint of the Otomi people, clear, strong, and consistent. Yet, when they tested remains from the years after the Aztec takeover, everything changed. The atomi markers were gone, completely erased. In their place appeared genetic traces from populations hundreds of miles away, people who had never belonged to that land. It was not the slow blending of bloodlines or peaceful cultural exchange. It was a total replacement, an entire population wiped out and substituted by another. The thought sent shivers through everyone who studied it. The cheerful city by the lake had become a ghost, whispering from beneath the soil, reminding the world how easily greatness can vanish, leaving only bones and questions behind. The battle between genes and identity. The findings from the University of Texas researchers were both groundbreaking and chilling. The Aztec conquest, once thought to be a story of military dominance and cultural expansion, turned out to be something much deeper. It didn't just redraw maps or reshape traditions, it rewired the very genetic identity of central Mexico. The DNA proved that original populations with unique ancestral markers had been wiped away and replaced by others with entirely different roots. What had once been cultural assimilation now looked like total population replacement. This was not a gentle merging of communities. Scientists called it demographic replacement, a term that sounds sterile but hides an unsettling truth. It meant entire populations were removed and substituted, their genetic traces erased from history. To accomplish such a massive transformation would have required enormous human movement, families uprooted, entire settlements emptied, and new groups brought in to take their place. The Aztecs weren't just building an empire, they were reshaping humanity itself in their region. Researchers have even begun describing this process as genetic colonization, an idea that sends shivers down the spine. It wasn't just about ruling land, it was about rewriting who the people were. The deeper the scientists dug into ancient DNA, the more patterns appeared across the empire, proof of systematic population shifts that stretched across hundreds of miles. It was a story that transformed the way history viewed Aztec expansion and left haunting questions about what had really happened to those who lived in central Mexico before the empire's rise. But just when it seemed the mystery couldn't grow more complicated, the DNA revealed a twist that stunned everyone. For generations, stories had told of a mythical homeland called Aztlan, a place of origins, half legend, half dream. Many dismissed it as pure folklore, but the genes whispered otherwise. Deep within the DNA of Aztec descendants, researchers found distinct Y chromosome groups, tiny genetic patterns that could be traced across vast regions of the Americas. These were like glowing breadcrumbs left behind by ancient travelers. These genetic clues, carrying names like QM3, QL663, QZ780, and others, revealed something astonishing. The Aztecs were not one single tribe at all. They were a mosaic of many different peoples who had come together over centuries, their bloodlines intertwining like threads in a vast, intricate tapestry. The sheer range of genetic diversity among Aztec descendants was far greater than scientists ever imagined. It told of migrations, unions, and collisions on a grand scale. Yet even this discovery carried a dark undertone. The genetic mixing didn't happen gently or over long stretches of peaceful coexistence. It happened fast, too fast. The DNA showed sudden, sweeping shifts that aligned perfectly with the disappearance of older populations from their lands. It began to look as if the Aztec rise wasn't simply a matter of cultural expansion, but a deliberate movement of people, mass relocations, carefully organized and brutally efficient. The thought was staggering. To replace entire populations would have taken vast coordination, perhaps resembling modern military planning. The Aztecs, it seemed, were not just warriors or builders. They were architects of human movement on a scale that defied imagination. Beneath the splendor of temples and pyramids, their empire had carried out one of the most dramatic reshaping of people and bloodlines the ancient world had ever known. Aztecs' sad truth. Beneath the dust of temples and the calm surface of ancient lakes, the DNA began to whisper secrets too heavy to ignore. As scientists gathered more samples and pieced together their findings, a terrifying pattern started to form. one that pointed to something far more deliberate than simple conquest. The evidence began revealing what might have been one of the most organized population displacements ever seen in pre-Columbian America. The story hidden in those ancient bones no longer spoke just of lost civilizations, it spoke of replacement. Everywhere researchers looked, the pattern repeated itself like a haunting echo. The original people, those who had lived on their lands for centuries, vanished from the genetic map. In their place appeared new populations carrying the genetic traces of the Aztec heartland and allied territories. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't peaceful mixing over time. The DNA showed precision, an orchestrated plan to reshape the human makeup of entire regions. Some experts began to call it genetic imperialism, an empire that didn't just conquer cities and cultures, but rewrote the bloodlines of those it ruled. But one question hung in the air, colder than any ruined shadow: what happened to the original inhabitants? The answers, found in fragments of bone and strands of DNA, were anything but comforting. Some clues suggested that conquered peoples had been taken far from their homes, relocated to distant parts of the empire to break their ties to their land and prevent rebellion. Others may have been absorbed into the Aztec system, turned into soldiers, workers, or servants, scattered across the empire so that their roots would fade into anonymity. Yet there was another darker possibility, one that researchers spoke of only in cautious tones, but that the evidence refused to silence. In some places, entire genetic lineages had vanished completely, not blended, not relocated, erased. The Y chromosome studies revealed something deeply disturbing. Lineages that should have survived through male descendants before the conquest were gone. Entire family trees had ended, leaving empty spaces in the genetic record where life should have continued. The discovery shook the scientific community. What had once been viewed as an empire of art, architecture, and spiritual devotion was now also revealing a shadowed side, a side built on human loss so vast it had left its mark in the very DNA of modern descendants. For centuries, the story of the Aztec rise had been told as one of glory and power. But now, in the quiet language of genes, a darker truth was unfolding. A truth about the real price of an empire and the countless lives that vanished so completely that only their absence remains. What the bones had to say. When researchers examined these ancient remains, they focused on two powerful sources of biological memory. The first was mitochondrial DNA, the thread passed from mothers to their children, generation after generation. The second was Y chromosome DNA, the line carried by fathers through their sons. Together, these tiny strands painted an astonishing picture of where the Aztec people came from and how they reshaped everything around them. The mitochondrial DNA extracted from the city of Tlatelolco shocked scientists. Instead of showing familiar regional roots, the genetic patterns pointed far north, toward lands now known as the southwestern United States. The connection was unmistakable. The ancestors of the Aztecs hadn't simply wandered a few valleys southward, they had embarked on epic journeys across deserts, mountains, and rivers, traveling hundreds, even thousands of miles. These migrations weren't slow and peaceful drifts over time. The genetic evidence showed they were sudden, sweeping, and immense, mass movements of people that transformed the landscape almost overnight. When scientists studied Y chromosome DNA, they found a level of genetic diversity so huge that it couldn't belong to a single tribe or isolated group. The only explanation was that multiple distinct populations had been rapidly absorbed into one empire. During the height of Aztec expansion, entirely new genetic markers appeared in central Mexico, markers that hadn't existed in the region before. It was as if the Aztecs had drawn people from faraway lands and stitched them together into a single vast population. This was not just the rise of an empire, it was an act of genetic engineering on a human scale. The Aztecs seemed to have managed population movements with astonishing precision, redistributing people like living pieces of a grand design. The pattern suggested a level of control and organization that rivaled the complexity of modern nations. Historians had long described the Aztec Empire as a story of conquest and tribute, But the DNA told something different. It wasn't just about ruling lands, it was about remaking them from the inside out. These revelations shook the foundations of everything scholars thought they knew. The Aztecs had always been seen as fierce warriors and master builders, but now the evidence hinted at something far more intricate and far more unsettling. Some researchers began to see them as architects of human populations, capable of orchestrating massive relocations and demographic manipulation. Others saw a darker truth, an empire that had deliberately erased whole communities, replacing them with people who carried the genetic signature of Aztec loyalty. As scientists continued to trace the DNA, another layer of tragedy surfaced. The areas where genetic replacement occurred also showed the disappearance of local languages, art styles, and spiritual customs. Each vanished gene seemed to take a culture with it. Towns that once sang in their own tongues now echoed with Aztec dialects. Temples that once honored local gods now bowed to Tenochtitlan's deities. It wasn't only bloodlines that were replaced, it was identity itself. The team at the University of Texas, whose research first uncovered these unsettling truths, called for history to be rewritten. What had once been described as conquest now looked more like demographic colonization, an intentional reshaping of entire populations to strengthen the empire's hold. The Aztecs hadn't merely conquered through war, they had conquered through genetics, crafting a new society from the bones of the old. What this means for humanity. When scientists stepped back to see the bigger picture, the story hidden in the Aztec DNA became more than a tale of one empire. It became a mirror, reflecting something deep about human civilization itself. The discoveries pulled back the curtain on how powerful societies throughout history may have shaped, moved, and even erased entire populations to build and protect their power. What the Aztec DNA revealed wasn't just shocking for what it said about them. It was unsettling because it showed how far humans have always been willing to go to control their world. The evidence painted a picture of precision and complexity that few had ever imagined possible for a pre-Columbian empire. The Aztecs, it seemed, had mastered something that even many modern governments struggle with: the ability to organize and relocate massive numbers of people across vast and challenging lands. These weren't scattered migrations or chaotic conquests. The DNA suggested careful planning, deliberate control, and enormous logistical skill. They could move hundreds of thousands of individuals, placing them exactly where they wanted them, reshaping not just borders, but the very human fabric of their territories. The DNA also whispered of cruelty, of what today might be called ethnic cleansing and forced resettlement. The complete disappearance of certain genetic lineages from regions under Aztec control didn't happen by accident. It pointed to deliberate acts of replacement and removal, carried out so thoroughly that entire bloodlines vanished from history. It was a chilling reminder that the empire's power may have rested not only on its temples and armies, but on the silent erasure of whole communities. Archaeologists have begun to see the same story written in stone and clay. In cities that once flourished with unique traditions, the ground now reveals sudden, sharp changes. Old pottery styles vanish, replaced by new ones. Local burial customs disappear overnight. Entire architectural designs shift, showing the unmistakable hand of new settlers. These abrupt transformations match the genetic evidence perfectly. They are the fingerprints of population replacement. The cities weren't slowly evolving, they were being repopulated. Some scholars now compare these Aztec practices to the empire-building strategies of other ancient powers. The Assyrians, for example, were infamous for uprooting entire nations and scattering them across their territories to keep rebellion at bay. The new evidence suggests that the Aztecs may have discovered and refined similar methods centuries earlier, creating one of the earliest examples of state-controlled demographic engineering in human history. What this means for science. The new discoveries about the Aztecs aren't just rewriting history, they're changing how history itself is studied. Scientists are now using mind-blowing tools that can read genetic clues hidden deep inside ancient bones, hair, and even soil. These modern techniques are like time machines, allowing researchers to piece together stories that had been lost for centuries. Through them, we can now trace where people moved, who they were related to, and even what kinds of food they ate, just from fragments of bone or teeth that are hundreds or thousands of years old. The real breakthrough came when scientists learned how to clean and study DNA that had nearly disappeared with time. In warm, humid places like central Mexico, DNA doesn't survive well. It breaks down fast after death. For years, this made it almost impossible to study the genes of ancient Mesoamerican people. But with the latest advances, experts can now recover information from pieces so tiny and damaged that earlier scientists would have thrown them away. Suddenly, bones that had sat in museum storage rooms for decades are revealing hidden worlds of genetic secrets. One of the most remarkable studies took place at Tlatelolco, where researchers analyzed old burial remains using the newest methods for studying mitochondrial DNA. This type of DNA, passed down from mothers, helped them see patterns of how people moved and mixed over time. Then they went even further by studying the Y chromosome, which is passed from fathers to sons. That opened an entirely new window into how men migrated, married, and settled across the Aztec Empire. Thanks to newer tools, researchers have also begun finding DNA in places they never thought to look. A strand of hair, a bit of tooth enamel, or even soil taken from an ancient grave can now hold enough genetic material to tell the story of someone's origins. Each new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, showing that pre-Columbian civilizations like the Aztecs were far more dynamic and genetically diverse than once believed. This mix of technology and discovery has shaken the scientific world. Every new batch of data seems to rewrite what was once thought to be true about the people who lived before European contact. Experts are thrilled but also uneasy, because the DNA evidence is so strong that it challenges long-held ideas about how ancient societies formed and spread. International experts studying ancient DNA have praised the precision and quality of the Aztec research. Yet many are also uneasy about what it means. The genetic patterns emerging from Aztec sites don't look like those of any other ancient civilization. They suggest that the Aztecs weren't just conquerors, they were innovators in controlling and redistributing entire populations. These discoveries are not just rewriting the story of one empire, they're redefining how we understand civilization itself. For centuries, bones and ruins told only part of the tale. Now, with DNA as the storyteller, the past is speaking again, softly, clearly, and with truths that are both fascinating and haunting. Doubts and proofs. Of course, not everyone agrees on what these DNA findings mean. Some critics warn that the results could be misleading because DNA doesn't always survive evenly in ancient remains. They suggest that what scientists are seeing might simply reflect which bones happen to preserve better. But most experts now believe that the evidence is too consistent across different places and types of DNA to be a coincidence. The patterns appear too strong and too widespread to ignore. The question is no longer whether these population shifts happened, but why they did, and what they reveal about how ancient American civilizations truly worked. Still, so many pieces of the puzzle remain missing. DNA tells us that entire groups of people vanished from their home regions after the Aztec conquest, but it doesn't tell us where they went. Were they eliminated, absorbed into other parts of the empire, or relocated to new settlements far away? Genetic surveys in other areas haven't yet found clear traces of these missing communities, leaving a haunting silence in the record. The mystery deepens when scientists think about the scale of what must have been required. Moving thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people across the rugged landscapes of Mexico would have been a massive undertaking. Food, water, shelter, protection, every detail would have needed careful planning. Yet somehow, the Aztecs managed to do it so efficiently that they left behind barely any visible trace of how it was done. The human side of this story is equally puzzling. Did the local populations agree to these moves, or were they forced? Did they go willingly, or under the weight of imperial control? The DNA can show what happened in people's bloodlines, but it can't capture their fears, struggles, or choices. It can't tell us whether these population transfers were peaceful or tragic. What it can show, though, is how fast the changes occurred, shockingly fast. Normally, such deep genetic mixing would take many generations, but in the Aztec case, it seems to have happened in just a few decades. as if entire populations were reshaped almost overnight. Some scientists think this might have been done through controlled marriages, where people from conquered lands were required to marry those loyal to the empire. This could have sped up the blending of bloodlines and cultures. But even this idea doesn't fully explain why some genetic lineages disappeared completely from certain areas, as if they were erased from history itself. Researchers are now exploring how these genetic shifts tie into changes in language, religion, art, and everyday life. If entire groups of people were replaced, it would make sense that their languages and customs vanished too. Temples, pottery, songs, and traditions might have disappeared with them. That could explain why so many aspects of Aztec culture appear to have spread so quickly and so completely across central Mexico. Yet scientists are careful not to rush to conclusions. They're still investigating whether these large-scale population changes were something unique to the Aztecs or a repeating pattern across earlier civilizations in Mesoamerica. Some early evidence suggests that other ancient states may also have practiced similar forms of demographic control whenever they expanded. But the research is just beginning, and each new discovery brings fresh questions. What's clear is that the Aztec story has become much more than a tale of battles and temples. It's a story written in the deepest layers of human DNA, a story of movement, loss, survival, and transformation. And as the science grows sharper, it's revealing that the people of ancient Mexico may have shaped their world in ways far more complex, powerful, and haunting than anyone ever imagined. What the future holds for genetics and history. The discoveries that peeled back the secrets of Aztec population replacement are only the beginning of a breathtaking scientific revolution. Across the world, researchers are developing even more advanced ways to read ancient DNA, methods so powerful that what we know today will soon look like the first scribbles in a new chapter of human history. For centuries, the bones of the past sat quietly in the earth, their stories forgotten. Now, science is learning to listen to whispers written in molecules, and what it's hearing is rewriting everything we thought we knew about how civilizations lived, moved, and changed. New breakthroughs are allowing scientists to find genetic traces not just in bones, but in the very soil ancient people walked on. Imagine standing at the site of a vanished city and discovering, through just a handful of dirt, who lived there, where they came from, how their diet shifted, and even when their population changed. What once sounded like fantasy is now becoming a reality in research labs around the world. Inspired by the Aztec revelations, scientists are now turning their gaze to other great civilizations: the Maya in Central America, the Inca in South America, and the Mississippian cultures of North America. Early DNA results are already showing hauntingly familiar patterns, signs that entire populations may have been replaced just as they were in the Aztec heartland. But this new science isn't stopping at DNA alone. Researchers are weaving together multiple strands of evidence to build a living picture of the past. Isotope analysis can reveal where people were born and what foods they ate, while genetic mapping shows how they moved and mixed. With artificial intelligence now entering the field, computers can scan through thousands of ancient samples at lightning speed, spotting migration paths, family ties, and population shifts that might have taken human researchers decades to uncover. Together, these tools are turning archaeology into something almost alive, a story told not just through artifacts and ruins, but through the bloodlines of those who once walked the earth. The revolution is going global. The same genetic techniques used on Aztec remains are now being prepared for sites in Europe, Africa, Asia, and Oceania. Scientists hope that, within a few years, we'll be able to trace how human populations moved across the entire planet over thousands of years, how empires rose, how they reshaped their people, and how those echoes still live in our DNA today. These studies might reveal that what the Aztecs did, managing and replacing populations on a massive scale, was not an isolated event, but part of a larger repeating story of empire building throughout history. Or perhaps they'll confirm that the Aztecs stood alone in their precision and scale, crafting one of the most dramatic demographic experiments the ancient world ever witnessed. The best part? This technology is becoming more available every year. Laboratories from Mexico to Europe are getting the equipment to handle ancient DNA. Collaborations between universities are breaking barriers, reaching remote regions, and uncovering voices long silenced by time. Civilizations that left no written words may finally tell their stories through the language of genes, giving us a new way to understand where we all come from. The revelations from Aztec DNA have shown us something haunting and beautiful, that history is not just buried under our feet, but running in our veins. The empire's power, once thought to rest on armies and tribute, now appears to have been built on something far more deliberate: the reshaping of people themselves. Entire groups, like the lost Otomi of Xaltacan, live on only in genetic traces and memories buried deep in the molecules of their descendants. These discoveries don't just rewrite history, they humanize it. They remind us that every empire, every civilization carries not just triumph and power, but also the quiet stories of loss, survival, and transformation written in the living code of humanity. Now, what do you think about the recent discovery? Let's hear from you in the comments. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.